The night my apartment burned down, my mother didn't ask if I was alive. She said, "Well, that's not our problem. My name is Emily Carter, and I was years old when everything I owned disappeared in under 7 minutes. It was January 13th. Just after 2 a.m., I stood barefoot in a Walmart parking lot, wrapped in a stiff red emergency blanket that smelled like smoke and melted plastic. Snowflakes drifted down, hissing when they hit the still warm pavement. Across the street, my apartment building burned like a torch. Orange flames climbed out of my third-floor windows, cracking the night open. I watched my life turn into ash. My laptop, my work files, my passport. The framed photo of me at 10 years old, standing between my parents back when they still pretended we were a normal family. My phone slipped from my shaking hands as firefighters rushed past me. When I picked it up, the screen was cracked. I called my parents anyway, because when everything collapses, you still call home. "Mom," I said when she answered. "There was a fire. My apartment is gone. I barely got out." There was a pause. I could hear a TV in the background, a laugh track, ice clinking in a glass. "And?" she said. "And I need help," I whispered. "Just for a few days. I don't even have shoes." My father took the phone. His voice was calm, annoyed, controlled. "Emily, you're almost 30, he said. "This is why adults have insurance." "I do," I said quickly. "But they're investigating. They won't release anything yet." Another pause. Then my mother again, colder this time. "This isn't our responsibility," she said. "We warned you about that building. Not our problem." The line went dead. I stood there staring at the dark screen while snow soaked through the thin blanket. The air smelled like burned wiring and wet ash. Somewhere inside that building, under the collapsed ceiling of my bedroom, was a blue folder I kept hidden beneath my bed. A folder my parents didn't know existed. What they also didn't know was that this fire wasn't just bad luck, and it wasn't just my apartment. The next morning, January 14th, 8:06, I sat under flickering fluorescent lights in the county fire marshal's office. My hair still smelled like smoke no matter how many times I rubbed my hands through it. A man in a gray jacket walked in carrying a thick file. "Daniel Ruiz," he said, shaking my hand. "Lead fire investigator." He slid photos across the table. Charred walls, blackened outlets, a close-up of my kitchen floor. "Your unit was the origin point," he said. "That doesn't mean fault, just fact." I swallowed and nodded. "There were traces of accelerant," he continued. "And the burn pattern suggests the fire spread faster than normal." My chest tightened. "Are you saying someone set it?" "I'm saying," he replied carefully, "this fire is being treated as suspicious." My phone buzzed in my lap. A text from my mother. "Do not say anything that could complicate this. We'll handle it." Handle it. That word burned worse than the smoke. My parents had always handled things by controlling the story, protecting their image and silencing me when it mattered. 2 hours later, they walked into the fire marshal's office uninvited. My mother looked flawless. My father wore his confident smile. She hugged me stiffly and whispered, "Smile. People are watching." My dad shook Ruiz's hand. "We're here to cooperate fully," he said, then glanced at me. Emily tends to exaggerate under stress. Then my mother slid a thick cream-colored envelope across the table. "Sign this," she murmured. "It's just a statement. For insurance. To keep things clean." I read the first line and my hands started shaking. Because if I signed it, the fire would be my fault. And if I didn't, I'd expose something they'd spent years hiding. If you're enjoying this story so far, like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? I looked from the envelope to the fire investigator and realized this wasn't help, it was a trap. I didn't sign the envelope. Instead, I slid it back across the table, my palms damp, my voice steady. "I need to read this with a lawyer." My mother's smile tightened. My father's jaw flexed once. A tell I'd learned as a kid meant he was angry but choosing control. "Emily," he said softly, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." Daniel Ruiz watched the exchange without interrupting. Pen paused over his notepad. The room hummed with fluorescent light. Somewhere down the hall, a copier whined. "I'm not making it harder," I said. "I'm making it accurate." My mother laughed, a small dismissive sound. "You're emotional. You lost your apartment. Of course you're confused." Confused. The word landed like a shove. Because I wasn't confused. I was cold, exhausted, and very aware that the statement she'd handed me blamed improper storage of flammable household materials in my kitchen. It listed me by full name, It protected the building owner, and it quietly absolved anyone else of involvement. Ruiz cleared his throat. Ms. Carter is within her rights to review any statement with counsel. My father smiled at him. Of course, we appreciate your thoroughness. The smile didn't reach his eyes. That afternoon, the story hit Facebook. I found out because my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. So sorry about your accident. Hope insurance covers it. Praying you learn from this. My mother had posted a photo of herself and my father at a charity luncheon. Pearls, tailored blazer, champagne flutes, captioned, "Grateful everyone is safe after a small kitchen fire at our daughter's apartment. Accidents happen. Accountability matters. Small, kitchen, accident." I stared at the post, my cheeks burning hotter than they had the night of the fire. The comments piled up. Friends from their church, business contacts. A city councilman liked it. I scrolled, numb, until I saw the private message request from my Aunt Laura. Call me now. Laura was my mother's older sister, the one who never bought the perfect family act, the one my mother called dramatic whenever she told the truth. I called from the rental car the insurance company had grudgingly approved for 3 days. The smell of smoke still clung to my coat. They're setting you up, Laura said without preamble. I saw the post, and I heard about the envelope. You heard? My voice cracked. Your mother called me to complain you were being difficult, Laura snorted. She always does that when she's scared. Scared of what? There was a pause. How much do you know about the building owner? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Just that my parents insisted I rent there. Said the owner was solid. Laura exhaled slowly. Emily, your father and the owner go way back. My stomach dropped. That building, Laura continued, has been under the city's watch list for code. Violations, electrical, old wiring, expensive fixes. The memory snapped into place, the flickering lights, the outlets that ran hot, the maintenance requests that went unanswered. What aren't you telling me? I asked. I don't have proof, Laura said carefully. But I have suspicions, and you should talk to a lawyer before you talk to anyone else. That night, another shoe dropped. Daniel Ruiz called at 9:43 p.m. We pulled security footage from a business across the street, he said. There's a gap. About 12 minutes. The camera goes dark shortly before the fire alarm triggers. My heart hammered. Is that normal? No, he said. And there's more. Your parents contacted the building owner within an hour of the fire before we released any public details. I swallowed. How do you know that? He paused. Phone records. With cause. The room felt suddenly smaller. The air heavier. I need you to understand, Ruiz continued. I'm not accusing anyone yet. But this case just escalated. As I hung up, my phone buzzed again. A new post from my mother, this time tagging me. Hard lesson in personal responsibility. We hope Emily does the right thing. My name. Public. Framed. I opened the blue folder I'd rescued from my car trunk. The only thing I'd managed to grab before the fire days ago. Inside were documents I'd kept quiet about for years. Old emails. A lease addendum I'd never understood. And a bank transfer receipt with my father's signature on it. My hands shook as I realized what they'd been trying to make me take the fall for, and why they were so desperate for my signature. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the blue folder open in my lap, flipping through papers by the light of a buzzing bedside lamp. Outside, trucks groaned down the highway. Inside, my pulse thudded in my ears. I'd kept that folder since I was 24, the age. I stopped trusting my parents' explanations. Back then, my dad had insisted on helping me secure my first real apartment. He said it was safer if everything went through him. Easier, smarter. I remembered how proud he sounded when he handed me the lease. Already signed. Family takes care of family, he'd said. What I hadn't realized at the time was that my name appeared twice in that paperwork. Once as the tenant, and once in a separate addendum I'd never understood as a financial guarantor for renovations the building owner planned but never completed. Renovations tied to electrical upgrades. My phone buzzed at 6:12 a.m. A message from my father. We need to talk today, privately. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the number Aunt Laura had texted me overnight. A lawyer, her lawyer. By 9:30 a.m., I was sitting across from Marianne Holt, a woman in her early 50s with sharp eyes and a calm, surgical way of listening. I laid everything out. The fire, the envelope, the Facebook posts, the building, the addendum. Marianne didn't interrupt. When I finished, she slid her glasses down and looked at me over the rims. Emily, she said, do you understand what they were trying to do? I swallowed. Blame me? More than that, she replied. They were positioning you to absorb liability for pre-existing code violations. If you'd signed that statement, you'd be responsible for damages that insurance would refuse to cover. My stomach churned. So, they were protecting the owner. And themselves, Marianne added. Because if your father facilitated that lease knowing about the violations, he could be exposed. The room felt like it tilted. At noon, my parents showed up at the motel. I hadn't told them where I was staying. My mother knocked once, then used her key card. She always did things like that. Small invasions disguised as concern. "We're worried," she said, scanning the room like she disapproved of the furniture. "You didn't answer your phone." "I was with a lawyer," I said. My father's eyes flashed. "That's unnecessary." "Not according to her," I replied, meeting his gaze. My mother sighed dramatically. "Emily, you're being manipulated. This investigator, this lawyer, they don't understand our family." "Our family?" I laughed once, sharp and bitter. "You told me my apartment burning wasn't your problem." "That was taken out of context," she snapped. I stood up. Everything is always out of context when it makes you look bad. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You sign that statement today and this all goes away. The insurance pays. The story dies. And if I don't?" His mouth tightened. "Then you're on your own." The threat hung in the air, heavy and familiar. They left without hugging me. That afternoon, Daniel Ruiz called again. "We pulled financials connected to the building," he said. "Recent cash transfers." One stood out. My heart raced. "From who?" "Your father," he said. "To the building owner. 6 months ago. Labeled consulting." I closed my eyes. "That's not illegal by itself," Ruiz continued. "But combined with the lease addendum and the accelerant traces, it paints a picture where my parents weren't just cold. They were involved." By evening, the pressure went public again. My mother posted screenshots, cropped emails, selective texts, implying I'd been negligent, irresponsible, unstable. Comments flooded in. Some people defended me, others didn't. Why won't she just cooperate? Sounds like she's hiding something. I sat on the motel bed, shaking as my phone rang. Unknown number. "Ms. Carter?" a woman said. "This is the insurance adjuster. We need clarification on a discrepancy in your lease documents." My chest tightened. "What discrepancy?" "There appears to be an addendum assigning responsibility for structural compliance. To you." I looked at the blue folder, at my father's signature. "They're lying," I whispered. "I know," the adjuster said quietly. "That's why I called you first." When the call ended, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about a fire. It was about control, money, and a paper trail my parents thought I'd never read. And the next move, mine or theirs, was going to be very public. The invitation arrived the next morning in my mother's. Handwriting, thick cream cardstock, gold embossing. Her signature flourish at the bottom like nothing in the world was wrong. The Whitmore Foundation Winter Benefit. January 20th, 7 p.m. Grand Regency Hotel Ballroom. Dress code, formal. I stared at the card and laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Of course they wanted a public stage. My parents never fought battles in private. If they could win them in front of an audience. They're setting the narrative, Marianne said when I showed her the invitation later that afternoon. If you don't show up, they'll say you're unstable. If you do, they'll bait you. So what do I do? She smiled slightly. You show up prepared. By January 20th, the city had moved on from my fire. News cycles are short like that. But my parents' world, donors, board members, politicians thrived on appearances. And tonight, they planned to appear generous, composed, blameless. I borrowed a navy dress from Aunt Laura. Simple, clean lines. Nothing flashy. I wanted to look like myself, not their version of me. The Grand Regency smelled like lilies and money. Crystal chandeliers reflected off marble floors. A string quartet played near the entrance. I could already hear my mother's laugh, bright, practiced, floating across the room. She saw me the moment I stepped inside. Her smile faltered for half a second. Then it returned, wider than before. Emily, she said loudly, pulling me into a hug that didn't reach her eyes. You came. Of course, I replied. You invited me. My father joined us, hand on my shoulder like a claim. Glad you're feeling better, he said. Stress can make people say things they don't mean. I met his gaze. Stress reveals things. We were barely 5 minutes into the evening when the whispers started. That's her. The daughter. The fire. My mother guided me toward a group of donors. Emily's been going through a lot, she said gently. We're hoping she takes responsibility and moves forward. Responsibility. That word again. I smiled tightly. Actually, the fire investigator has some interesting updates. My father's fingers dug into my arm. Not tonight. I excused myself to the bar, my heart pounding. That's when I saw Daniel Ruiz near the edge of the ballroom, in a dark suit that didn't quite fit the room. He nodded once when our eyes met. Marianne hadn't been bluffing. During dinner, my mother took the stage. She spoke about resilience, about family values, about accountability. The applause was warm and unquestioning. Then she gestured toward me. And my daughter Emily, she said, voice thick with practiced emotion, is learning a hard lesson about independence. Every head turned. My chest tightened. This was it, the moment they'd planned. Before I could stop myself, I stood. Actually, I said, my voice carrying farther than I expected, there's something I should clarify. A ripple moved through the room. My father half stood, panic flashing across his face. Emily, sit down. I didn't. Last week, I continued, my apartment burned down. I was told it wasn't my family's problem, but it turns out it wasn't an accident either. The room went quiet. Daniel Ruiz stepped forward, badge visible now. I'm with the county fire marshal's office, he said calmly. This event coincides with an ongoing investigation. Gasps, murmurs. My mother's face drained of color. This is inappropriate, my father snapped. You're embarrassing yourself. Ruiz didn't look at him. We've identified financial transfers, lease irregularities, and evidence suggesting the fire may have been used to obscure code violations. The word obscure landed like a bomb. My mother gripped the podium. This is a misunderstanding. Maybe, Ruiz said. That's what the records will determine. I felt something shift in the room, curiosity turning into suspicion. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A message from Marianne. Now. I took a breath. Before anyone leaves, I said, there's one document I think you should all see. I reached into my bag, and my father finally looked afraid. I pulled the folded document from my bag, the paper warm from my grip. The ballroom felt different now, like the air had thickened. Forks hovered mid-air, glasses paused halfway to lips. People who'd donated thousands of dollars for the privilege of being in this room leaned forward, suddenly invested in something far more interesting than dessert. This, I said, unfolding the paper slowly, is a lease addendum I was never properly informed about. My father shook his head sharply. Emily, stop. You don't understand what you're holding. Oh, I do, I replied. I finally do. I turned the page so the front tables could see the highlighted sections. My name, twice, one as tenant, one as financial guarantor for structural compliance. Murmurs rippled through the room. This addendum, I continued, assigned responsibility for electrical upgrades to me, upgrades that were never completed. A man at the head table frowned. Electrical upgrades? Daniel Ruiz stepped in smoothly. The building in question has a documented history of wiring violations. Several notices were issued but unresolved. My mother's voice trembled as she laughed. This is absurd. Our daughter is confused. She's been under a lot of stress. No, Aunt Laura said, standing from the back of the room. Head snapped toward her. She's been under your control. Laura walked forward, heels clicking against marble. You pressured her into that lease. You discouraged inspections. And you told her not to ask questions. My father's face flushed. This is family business. Then you shouldn't have made it public, Laura shot back. Ruiz cleared his throat. There's more. The word landed heavy. We traced a financial transfer made 6 months before the fire, he said. From Mr. Carter to the building owner, $50,000, labeled consulting. A gasp cut through the room. That money, Ruiz continued, coincided with the postponement of mandatory electrical repairs. My father stepped forward, hands raised. That's a lie. I consult for multiple properties. Then you won't mind explaining it under oath, Ruiz replied evenly. I watched my parents' world tilt. People who'd smiled at them minutes earlier now avoided eye contact. A woman whispered urgently to her husband. Someone quietly stood and left. My mother's composure cracked. Emily, she hissed, abandoning the podium. You're ruining everything. I met her eyes. You told me my life wasn't your problem. Remember? Silence. Ruiz nodded to a uniformed officer near the exit. We'll be in touch, he said to my parents. Please don't leave the state. That's when the panic set in. My father grabbed my arm, hard. You think you've won? He whispered. You have no idea what you've done. I pulled free. I protected myself. Marianne appeared at my side like she'd been there all along. Any further contact with my client should go through me. The room buzzed now, phones out, texts flying. The narrative my parents had so carefully curated was collapsing in real time. As I walked toward the exit, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't my mother. It was the insurance adjuster. We've reviewed the new information. Your policy remains valid. We're expediting your claim. I stopped just inside the doorway, the cold air from outside washing over me. For the first time since the fire, I could breathe. If you're enjoying this story, like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Behind me, I heard my mother cry out, sharp, desperate, as donors began asking questions she couldn't deflect. This wasn't over, but the balance had shifted, and my parents finally understood something they never expected to learn in public. I wasn't going to take the fall for them. The real confrontation didn't happen in the ballroom. It happened 3 days later, in a conference room on the 7th floor of the county administration building. No chandeliers, no applause, just gray walls, a long table, and the quiet hum of an overworked HVAC system. January 23rd, 10:14 a.m. My parents sat across from me side by side, dressed like they were attending another fundraiser. My mother's lipstick was perfect. My father's tie was centered. Appearances still mattered to them, even here. Daniel Ruiz sat at the head of the table. Marianne was beside me, a legal pad open, pen ready. "We're going to review documents," Ruiz said, out loud. "For the record," my mother folded her hands. "This is unnecessary." Ruiz didn't respond. He slid the first page across the table. "Lease addendum dated March 3rd, 5 years ago," he read. "Assigning electrical compliance liability to Emily Carter." My father's jaw tightened. "Mr. Carter," Ruiz continued, "is this your signature?" "Yes," my father said flatly. "Did you explain this clause to your daughter?" Silence. Marianne leaned forward. "Answer the question." "No," my father said. Ruiz nodded and moved on. "Bank transfer," he said, lifting the next page. $50,000 from Carter Holdings to Whitman Properties. Purpose, consulting. "That's legitimate," my father snapped. "Dated 6 months before the fire," Ruiz said calmly. The same week scheduled electrical upgrades were postponed. My mother's foot tapped beneath the table. Tap, tap, tap. "Text messages," Ruiz continued, tapping his tablet. "Between Mrs. Carter and the building owner. 2 days before the fire." My heart pounded. He read aloud. "If the inspection happens, this becomes very expensive. We need time." My mother's face drained of color. "That message," Ruiz said, "was sent at 11:48 p.m. 2 days later. The inspection was canceled. 4 days after that, the fire occurred." "This is circumstantial," my father barked. Ruiz finally looked up. Circumstantial evidence becomes compelling when it forms a pattern. He turned to the final document. "Insurance statement prepared for Emily Carter to sign," he said. "Assigning fault for improper storage of flammable materials." Marianne spoke softly. Had she signed this? She would have assumed responsibility for damages, resulting from pre-existing code violations. My mother's composure shattered. "She's our daughter," she cried. "We were trying to protect her." I laughed once hollow. "You told me it wasn't your problem." The room fell silent. Ruiz closed the folder. "Based on the evidence, this matter is being referred to the district attorney for potential fraud and obstruction." My father stood abruptly. "This is a mistake." 2 uniformed officers appeared at the door. "No," Ruiz said quietly. "This is accountability." As my parents were escorted out, my mother turned back to me, mascara streaking. "You didn't have to destroy us." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "You destroyed yourselves." When the door closed, the silence felt clean. Marianne squeezed my hand. "You did exactly what you needed to do." Outside, winter sunlight spilled across the steps of the building. I inhaled deeply, the cold air sharp in my lungs. For the first time since the fire, I wasn't afraid of what came next. But consequences don't stop with one meeting. And the hardest one was still waiting at home. Consequences don't arrive all at once. They land in waves. The first wave hit my parents' bank accounts. Within a week of the referral to the district attorney, Carter Holdings accounts were frozen pending review. My father's business partners, men who'd toasted him at galas, quietly pulled out. 2 board seats he'd held for over a decade were temporarily reassigned. My mother's foundation postponed its spring fundraiser until further notice. People stopped calling. The second wave was legal. Marianne called me on February 2nd, her voice measured but unmistakably satisfied. "The DA is moving forward. Fraud, attempted insurance manipulation, potential obstruction." I sat in the rental car outside the storage unit, where I'd moved the few salvaged items from my apartment. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. "What happens now?" I asked. "They'll fight," Marianne said. "They always do. But the paper trail is strong, and Daniel Ruiz doesn't miss details." The third wave was public. A local blog picked up the story first. Prominent couple. Linked to apartment fire investigation. Then a regional outlet. Nothing flashy, just facts. But facts were enough. Comments filled in the rest. Guess money can't buy silence forever. Feel bad for the daughter. Family betrayal hits different. I tried not to read them. Tried. The hardest wave, though, was personal. I found it waiting for me at Aunt Laura's kitchen table. She'd made soup, the kind with too many vegetables and not enough salt. Comfort food, the way she always cooked when emotions were heavy. We sat across from each other, steam rising between us. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I think so," I said. "Most days," she nodded. "There's something you should know." She slid a small envelope toward me. Old, yellowed at the edges. "It's from your grandmother," Laura said. "She gave it to me years ago. Asked me to hold on to it until you were ready." My chest tightened. "Ready for what?" Laura's eyes softened. "The truth." Inside the envelope was a letter dated 22 years earlier. Written in my grandmother's careful cursive. I recognized it instantly. The same handwriting from birthday cards. She'd sent until my mother slowly pushed her out of my life. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means you're grown and brave enough to see people clearly." My throat closed as I read on. The letter explained how my grandmother had tried to intervene when my parents first started using control as love. How she'd warned my father that treating family like assets would cost him everything. How she'd set aside a small trust in my name. Money meant to help me start over if I ever needed to. My hands shook. "I didn't know." "They hid it," Laura said quietly. "They didn't think you'd ever need an exit." Tears slipped down my cheeks, hot and unstoppable. Not from grief, from relief. That night, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time alone. Snow dusted the headstone. The world was quiet. I told her thank you, out loud. The next morning, the insurance payout cleared. Enough to replace what I'd lost. Enough to put a down payment on a small condo across town. New wiring. New inspections, my name only on the deed. The final wave came unexpectedly. My father called from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. "Emily," he said, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Your mother isn't well. This has been hard." I closed my eyes. "Get a lawyer," I said. "And don't call me again." He started to speak. I ended the call. Some bridges don't burn. They collapse under the weight of truth. I stood in my new living room a week later, sunlight pouring through clean windows, and realized something simple and powerful. I was safe, and for the first time in my life, that safety belonged to me. The condo didn't feel like home at first. It was too quiet, too clean. No echoes of old arguments, no creaks that made my shoulders tense. The walls were white and bare, the wiring brand new. The inspection report taped proudly inside the kitchen cabinet like a promise. Safe, mine. I moved in on March 11th with 2 suitcases, a box of rescued documents, and a chipped mug Aunt Laura insisted I take. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the early spring air, drifting through the open windows. I slept on a mattress on the floor the first night and woke up without dread pressing on my chest. That was new. I started rebuilding in small, deliberate ways. A thrifted couch, a desk by the window, a fern I somehow kept alive. Each choice felt like reclaiming something my parents had always decided for me. Work stabilized too. My employer had followed the news quietly but never questioned my integrity. When I finally returned to the office, a coworker left a sticky note on my monitor. "Glad you're back." I cried in the bathroom for 5 minutes and then got back to work. The legal process churned on in the background. Depositions, subpoenas, long emails from Marianne that I read carefully and answered once, cleanly, without emotion. I learned how to set boundaries in writing, clear sentences, no apologies. Then, in late April, my mother tried to come back. It started with an email. Subject line, "We need to talk." I didn't open it. 2 days later, flowers arrived. White lilies. My stomach clenched at the sight of them. She'd always use flowers as punctuation. Sorry, flowers. Control flowers. Remember who raised you. Flowers. I gave them to my neighbor. The third attempt came in the form of a handwritten letter slipped under my door. No stamp, she'd found my address. Emily. Families survive hard seasons. We can still fix this. People are talking. Let's present a united front. United front. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing off my empty walls. She still thought this was about image. That night I called Marianne. She's testing your boundaries, Marianne said. Do you want me to respond? Yes, I said. Once, for the record, the response went out the next morning. Short, firm. All communication should go through counsel. Do not contact Emily Carter directly again. Silence followed. In May, I met Daniel Ruiz for coffee, not as an investigator, but as a witness finishing paperwork. We sat outside a cafe, sunlight warming the table between us. You handled yourself well, he said. A lot of people fold when pressure comes from family. I used to, I admitted. I don't anymore. He nodded. That's usually when the truth finally sticks. By early summer, the case was no longer quiet. Formal charges were filed against the building owner. My parents were named in civil proceedings tied to financial misconduct. Their foundation dissolved. Their friends scattered. And still, they tried one last thing. A mutual acquaintance reached out, careful and polite. Your parents want to apologize, privately, no lawyers, closure. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, closure isn't a meeting. It's a boundary. I blocked the number. On June 30th, I hung the last picture on my wall, a photo of me and Aunt Laura on the day I moved in, both of us squinting into the sun, smiling without effort. That night, sitting on my couch, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. But the story wasn't finished. Not quite. Because the final chapter wasn't about them. It was about what I chose next. The day everything finally closed, it wasn't dramatic. No courtroom speech. No gavel slam. No headline with my name in bold. It was a Tuesday morning in late August. Clear sky, mild heat. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my condo barefoot, drinking coffee from that chipped mug Aunt Laura gave me, when Marianne's email came through. Subject, final resolution. I opened it slowly, like my body already knew what it would say. The civil case had settled. My parents had agreed to financial penalties, restitution, and permanent removal from any boards connected to public charities. The criminal case against the building owner moved forward independently. My parents wouldn't be going to jail, but their reputations, businesses, and carefully curated image were finished. There would be no comeback tour. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a lawnmower outside. Ordinary sounds, peaceful sounds. I expected to feel victorious. What I felt instead was light. I thought back to that night in the parking lot, the cold, the smoke, my mother's voice saying, "Not our problem." I finally understood something I hadn't then. They didn't abandon me that night. They revealed themselves. And that truth, painful as it was, saved me years of confusion. A few weeks later, I ran into my father at the grocery store. He looked older, smaller, his confidence, the thing he'd always worn like armor, was gone. For a second, we just stood there between the cereal aisle and the freezer section. "Emily," he said quietly. I nodded. "Dad." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, apologize, explain, rewrite history. I didn't wait. "I hope you figure things out," I said. "But I'm not part of that anymore." And I walked away. That was the moment I knew the boundary was real. Life didn't become perfect after that, but it became honest. I started volunteering with a tenant advocacy group, helping people understand leases before signing them. I shared my story anonymously at first, then openly. Emails came in from strangers who'd been pressured, manipulated, told they were too emotional to question authority. I told them what I wish someone had told me earlier. If someone needs you silent to protect themselves, they're not protecting you. A year after the fire, I stood in my living room during a thunderstorm. Real thunder this time, not sirens. Rain hammered the windows. The lights stayed on. No flicker, no fear. I texted Aunt Laura a photo of the storm and wrote, "Still standing." She replied instantly, always were. Sometimes people ask if I miss my parents. I miss the idea of them. I don't miss the reality. Family isn't who shares your last name. It's who shows up when everything burns and doesn't ask what it will cost them. If you're enjoying this story, like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? And I want to ask you something honestly. If the people closest to you asked you to take the blame to keep the peace, would you sign? Or would you choose yourself? Because choosing yourself doesn't make you heartless. It makes you free. And sometimes, freedom is the only fire worth surviving.